Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
There was a moment when a Canadian psychology professor became one of the most talked about people on the entire planet. His lectures on mythology and meaning filled theaters, his self-help book dominated bestseller lists, and his words sparked endless headlines and debates. To many, he was a mentor, and to others, he was the most dangerous figure alive. Jordan Peterson was a cultural icon. His rise marked one of the most fascinating intellectual dramas in history. His journey from obscure academic to global celebrity exposed just how hungry people were for clarity in a chaotic world, and how quickly that hunger could turn into controversy. The debates he ignited revealed something deep about our human nature. We have a tendency to polarize, and to turn everything into a battlefield, even the search for wisdom. In this era, Peterson captured lightning in a bottle, and also smashed the bottle. This is how Jordan Peterson created and destroyed his credibility. We need to establish the context of what got us here. This is a layered topic, meaning it represents something way bigger than Jordan Peterson. But what do you mean by meaning? Here we go. This requires one of those long-winded answers. Let's look at how people find meaning. Traditional religion was dying in the West during the 21st century, especially among the younger generations. But the decline didn't mean people stopped searching for meaning. They just started getting their existential crises from web forums and stoned podcasters. In this era, one place emerged as the town square of philosophical overconfidence: Reddit. Reddit was the arcade of intellectualism. It was pure overstimulation. But instead of fun games, you had forums full of hermits pretending like they were experts. Different subreddits were devoted to different kinds of conversation topics. And of course, when it comes to conversations about contemplating our place in the universe, the atheism subreddit was one of these places for hashing out these conversations. And on this subreddit, January 4th, 2013 marked an iconic day in internet history. On this day, a user named A.A. Lewis would create a quote that would change the way modern society viewed everything. This quote would go on to be referenced extensively. Brace yourself, because this is that quote. Just to be clear, I'm not a professional quote maker. I'm just an atheist teenager who greatly values his intelligence and scientific fact over any silly fiction book written 3,500 years ago. That being said, I am open to any and all criticism. In this moment, I am euphoric, not because of any phony god's blessing, but because I am enlightened by my intelligence. A.A. Lewis. This is the day atheism became cringe. Unfortunately for A.A. Lewis, when you proclaim your own intelligence, you do not look enlightened. Memes of "in this moment I am euphoric" were sprouting up everywhere. Atheism started getting associated with this archetype of a weird, smug, fedora-wearing neckbeard who sits in his basement and says, well, actually, and picks logical arguments with people online about, of all things, religion. If you're looking for something to argue about and call silly, religion is like the lowest hanging fruit. The internet began roasting this archetype endlessly because this archetype got associated with Reddit. And when you get associated with Reddit, you're never going to be cool. There has always been a population of secular people who never had any interest in devoting any energy to thinking about existential matters. It's nothing new. But this population started to see atheism as just unpleasant, socially inept, and out of touch. Atheism was once a simple belief. Wait, not even a belief, a lack of a belief. It was basically just part of being human before you get introduced to any spiritual ideas. Having a spiritual belief was a mental modification. Being an atheist was a default setting. Being an atheist was like being uncircumcised, and there are some cultural layers to that perspective. What was once this basic lack of a belief slowly became viewed as its own dogma. It became performative. It became preachy. It became evangelical. Atheism became the easiest religion to troll. That's unironically how it somehow came to be seen, because atheists became synonymous with Redditors. In the same way that the uber-religious evangelical had its own weird stereotype, the atheist now had its own weird stereotype as well. Years of progress lost. Years of new atheism establishing itself as a common-sense approach were destroyed. In the 2000s, prominent figures like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens gained a lot of awareness and audiences. Best-selling books like The End of Faith, The God Delusion, and God is Not Great sold millions, offering accessible arguments against religion, and insights to the inevitable skepticism many have about these ideas. Their focus on religion and science resonated with those concerned about religious influence in politics and education of that era. This did a lot to shift public discourse in asking more critical questions about religion and influencing many skeptics. But the new atheist movement was ultimately just a reaction to something that came before it. There was a surge of Christianity in the West during the early 2000s. 9/11 shook up a lot in the United States. It fostered a search for meaning, community, and moral clarity, making church attendance spike. Megachurches exploded in popularity, fueling Christianity's visibility and attracting suburban demographics. Quite a few rock bands gained traction beyond church audiences, sometimes even getting airplay on mainstream radio stations. This made a cultural impact with the youth, making religion more integrated in the culture.
Can't you see you're not making Christianity better? You're just making rock and roll worse.
Cultural phenomenons emerged from media like VeggieTales and the very similar Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Bush-era politics were heavily influenced. The Jesus fish was everywhere, becoming an identity symbol tied to both devout and casual Christian philosophies. All of this had to happen in order for new atheism to become as relevant as it became. And as much as each group may disagree with this, Christianity and new atheism were genuinely different sides of the same coin. Basically, as religion was losing its relevancy in the 2010s, atheism was also losing its relevancy. The euphoric Reddit stereotype represented a foreshadowing of what was to come. If you were not an out-of-touch religious person, you were an out-of-touch neckbeard. People were becoming very polarized. People were giving labels. You could no longer simply opt out of an identity without opting into a new one. You could not just sit anything out anymore. If you did not choose your own identity, one would be chosen for you. Dogma never dies. It just changes flavors. In the 2010s, church attendance was dipping, and fewer people were checking the religious box on surveys. But humans do not ditch belief systems, they swap them out. What stepped into the void was a framework that looked a lot like religion in its moral absolutes and its way of sorting the world into saints and sinners. When I started attending college in the mid-2010s, one thing became immediately clear. People were obsessed with social justice. Obsessed. There was something unique about the way people were talking about this thing called identity politics. It's like it was a new kind of gospel. I understand that was not its intention, but that was how a lot of people viewed it. Love it or hate it, I'm only telling you how many people viewed these things at the time. I understand these topics are currently completely exhausted, but we're talking about an earlier time. This was a messy way of how a lot of people who just became old enough to vote got introduced to politics. Social justice was intended to be a movement focused on fairness and fixing inequalities, and it became a lens for understanding everything. It had its own sacred texts, but instead of getting written in scripture, they were written in blog posts, academic papers, and tweets. Concepts like privilege, intersectionality, and systemic oppression were truths you either accepted or rejected at your peril. College students would tell you to check your privilege. People in college, with the monetary and intellectual privilege that got them there, would tell you that you are the one with the privilege. To question any of this was to risk being cast out like a heretic in a medieval village. I remember seeing 19-year-olds at my university treating these ideas like they were unlocking the secrets of the universe. It was not enough to agree. You had to perform your allegiance, to signal your virtue in the right way, whether that meant calling out something problematic or posting the perfect thing on social media within the perfect time frame. The religious parallels ran deep. There was an original sin baked into it. Nobody could escape their privilege, just like nobody could escape being born a sinner. The rituals were different, but they were there. Public apologies for missteps, confessions of ignorance, and the constant self-examination to root out unconscious bias. Doing good was not enough. It was about being good, about purifying yourself in the eyes of the community. Like any church, the community offered a sense of belonging and a shared purpose. You were part of a chosen few who saw the world clearly, while others stumbled in the dark. Just as religions have their schisms, social justice had its purity spirals. People started policing each other's language, their intentions, their very thoughts. A wrong word could get you excommunicated, aka canceled. Friends turned on friends, despite having the exact same views on policy, because someone hadn't been aware enough or hadn't used the right phrase. You were either with the cause or against it, and doubt was a sin. It filled the same psychological holes that religion used to. People have holes that need filled. People deeply crave meaning. People desire a way to make sense of a chaotic world. People want a story. They want a story that explains why things are broken and how to fix them. Social justice offered that narrative. The world is unjust because of power structures, and the path to salvation is dismantling them. It gave people a mission, a way to feel righteous, and a community to hold them up. But it also came with the same traps as any dogma, a tendency to see enemies everywhere and a certainty that you're on the right side of history. I came to college with progressive ideas. I came into college agreeing with the same policies supported by these students. I was on the same side as these people who were obsessed with identity politics. But these fellow college students were making my perspectives very hard for me to defend. It wasn't because of their core perspectives, but rather because of their erratic, immature behavior. It was the way their loudest voices would throw the loudest tantrums. They acted like toddlers. They were terrible, terrible salespeople. Their marketing and public relations were atrocious. Growing up in a rural area, I'd occasionally run into these homeschooled, chronically sheltered kids who were so socially inept to the point where I'd wonder how people like this were going to survive when they grew up. In college, when I'd see people with neon-colored hair who were very emotionally sensitive and unstable, I would recognize a different flavor of the exact same archetype. It's like neither archetype even knew they were wearing blinders. But I digress. I needed to just focus on my schoolwork. In order to simultaneously knock out multiple types of credits, I took this class called Cultural Pluralism in the United States. The curriculum was exactly what the course was titled. It was United States history. It examined how different cultures had integrated into the nation and what they faced. Contrary to those popular criticisms of the time, the class did not tell me to check my privilege. The class did not tell me I was bad for my race or my gender or my sexuality. The class was discussion-based. And the professor was a mild-mannered person, and she encouraged people to bring up different ideas to facilitate discussion. She would thank students for bringing up different viewpoints. The professor was fine. The curriculum was fine. But the people in the class were insane. Upper-class white kids competing to see who could say the most outrageous thing that had nothing to do with what we were learning about. They would compete to see who could get the most offended and exaggerate their emotions the most. I still don't know what was going on. I don't know if they thought it would get them extra credit or brownie points with the Gen X professor or what. At one point, this dude tried to make the argument that the Olympics was a racist competition to see which race was the best. At one point, this girl tried aggressively arguing how Marvel needs to integrate more LGBT representation in its superheroes. And it was like, really? Can this wait? We are right in the middle of talking about how people from Japanese ancestry got put into concentration camps in the 1940s. Let's maybe establish some priorities here. Anytime things like this would happen, I could see exactly how the conservatives in my small town would laugh at all of this, and continue thinking progressive ideas had zero credibility. Since I wanted more people to be progressive, I tried communicating to these people in my class that their behaviors were a terrible reflection of their philosophies. That was a stupid thing I tried doing.
You've never experienced depression in your entire life. Neither have I. You're a white male!
Before we go any further, we need to make something clear. I'm describing the cultural atmosphere as many young straight white men perceived it at the time. I'm not making a universal claim about the movement or about every person involved in it. Whether or not someone personally agreed with this framing, this was the message a lot of people in that demographic walked away with. There was a real messaging crisis when it came to this group, which would snowball into something we'd see over the next decade. Part of progress is understanding how to send an effective message to your intended audience. So if we ignore the connotation of this message as it was presented during this era, it's going to make it harder to encourage progress moving forward. At the time, the loudest voices gave this demographic the sense that their identity placed them at the center of a permanent moral disadvantage, a kind of original sin. They felt like anything they said was assumed to be ignorant, and any attempt to learn or engage risked coming off as performative. Many were left believing they would never be fully accepted, even by people who otherwise shared their views. No matter what people thought of this outcome, this was the impression many straight white men were given, regardless of their intentions or commitments to any causes, and it became a prophecy. A lot of once progressive men began avoiding these philosophies altogether, while the conservative men went way farther with their conservative perspectives. Who could have seen this coming? If you tell someone enough times what they are, and nothing they do will ever change what they are, they're going to start seeing themselves as what you tell them they are, and instead of running from it, they embrace it. To be absolutely clear, I am not endorsing this worldview. I'm explaining the environment that shaped people's reactions at the time, because this had major impacts on what we'd eventually see in the mid-2020s. College campuses were loaded with these quote-unquote social justice warriors who lived in such a tunneled echo chamber that they were alienating their politically uninvolved peers. If you're not into politics, you're part of the problem. Yes, that's very wise messaging that will certainly convince people. It's like these people were their own worst enemies. In hindsight, they did irreversible damage to their cause. These were individuals who were so afraid of being wrong and obsessed with their appearances that they ended up not focusing on the messaging effectiveness of the actual policies they supported. They were tragically more focused on the aesthetics. A reaction was brewing to all of this. Many people were fed up. What happened next was a conservative backlash.
You must be a biological boy to be a Boy Scout. You have to be a boy to be a Boy Scout.
Is that written though? Okay.
In the name Boy Scouts.
Time to listen up, you silly liberal fruitcakes.
You're not oppressed, you're entitled. That's your problem.
You know what's very interesting?
You're not impressed. You think anyone came
Very
here?
interesting.
Is he gonna check his privilege? That's not going to happen.
The roofs over your head, the floor under your feet, pretty much everything you use was designed and built by a man.
You think anyone came here to
Have I
hear you?
stated that I am
Nobody
oppressed?
came here. Nobody came here for you. Sit down.
Please listen to me because I am.
They're confused. They're confused. You know why? Because I'm not your gender studies professor who has to cater to your trigger warning, microaggression, safe space bullshit.
You know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder.
And very recently,
No, that's
and when
incorrect,
young
because
men,
when you go
may I be
further
allowed to
in the
finish?
business,
Sorry,
that is
I'm talking
not
about men, darling. When
And you called him a darling?
Darling?
Incredibly rude, and now you think it's funny.
Yeah, I have a right to say it, so I'm gonna say it.
So you have a right to offend them.
By the way, these opinions you're yelling out, they're not even your opinions. They're your opinions from your gender studies professor, and the really reason you picked it was because you thought it was your best chance at getting laid.
So you should be
then
writing the laws of society and telling people who they can offend and who they can't offend.
You're not fighting for free speech. You're not fighting for rights. You're fighting for the right to be a pussy and not hear opinions that you don't like.
No, it's her. You're not being polite to the pronouns.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay, forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings.
We have produced another pathetic, monstrous creature as a result of this phenomenon known as the male feminist. This is about the most depressingly hilarious creation of modern life.
This monster right here that you're so afraid of, the face you see in your nightmares, was created by social justice warrior assholes like you.
The American dream is dead.
Debates over identity politics and social justice became the new thing that happened on college campuses. It was controversial, it was provocative, and it spoke to people. Conservative commentators gained prominence by challenging what they saw as ideological conformity, often confronting students in highly publicized events. Videos titled things like "Ben Shapiro penetrates liberal with facts and logic" went viral. And of course, there were tons of students who tried shutting down these events. They viewed these events as dangerous, promoting dangerous speech. There was historically this preconceived notion that college is a place where you get exposed to new, uncomfortable ideas you might disagree with. I guess a lot of people trying to shut down these conversations had different expectations of college. A lot of campus administrators themselves tried shutting down these events. These moments resonated with many who were genuinely concerned about the erosion of free expression. The loudest progressives created an atmosphere where average apolitical students felt like asking questions could get them ostracized, humiliated, or punished. The rules of conversation seemed to change overnight. What you could say, what you couldn't say, what would label you as problematic. It gave rise to a culture of fear, where the principle of free speech felt like it was slipping away under the weight of social taboos. While the fear was real, the way it was channeled often took on a cartoonish quality. The viral clips of commentators dunking on clueless 19-year-olds turned complex issues into viral entertainment.
Okay, so what do you think about Ben Shapiro, who won't stop
He's a nerd. Facts, no feelings. Facts, no feelings. You have a yarmulke on your head. Facts, no feelings. Wait, is this facts right here? Is this facts? He just goes to colleges and beats up on fucking 19-year-olds that just learned about Marxism. You're not smart.
So people wanted someone who could name the problem without reducing everything to owning the libs sound bites. They wanted a voice that could step outside the shouting matches, speak with a slower, more reflective cadence, and appeal to values that transcended the left-right divide. In the academic world, one such figure began to emerge.
Well, it is a controversial topic on a Toronto University campus this month. Some people on the campus saying pronouns like he, she, him, or her do not represent them accurately. Now, the university wants staff to use alternate pronouns, but Jordan Peterson is a psychology professor at the university, and he is refusing to do that. Joining us right now is Professor Jordan Peterson.
You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
What the fuck?
Is that your medical opinion?
What, is that your medical opinion? Like, you are aware that non-binary people are valid in the American Psychological Association.
Is that your opinion?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
It's about non-binary pronouns.
No, it's not.
Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter. Look, I think that's what's happening is that we're pushing over a line we shouldn't cross. The newest legislation is requiring people to use.
But you are aware that that's being put in place so that we can't get fired.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. When the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
So, who is this legislation harming? Who is
harming anybody who wants to use their own words?
So, in what capacities? Be specific.
Look, it's important that people are able to use their own words.
Okay.
Because that's how we think.
And if the government starts legislating how we think, and
so
how
if
we
I
speak,
wanted to call you she,
are you going to let me
no, I'm playing off of what you're saying. If I wanted to call you she and her and miss, because that's my freedom of speech, and if everyone just called you that all the time, and that was the only thing.
Can't you tell?
I think that you don't care because you've never had to face that, and it's a common trend among people who have never had to face like transgender-related discrimination that you think it's not a big deal because you don't have to deal with it.
I didn't say I didn't think it was a big deal. I said I didn't care if people called me that.
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson was a psychology professor at the University of Toronto. He was a respected academic in his field, but far from a household name. However, in 2016, he posted a series of YouTube videos criticizing Canadian legislation, Bill C-16, that he argued could compel speech around gender pronouns. To his supporters, this was more than about pronouns. It was about principle. They saw a mild-mannered, soft-spoken academic willing to stand up against what he framed as creeping authoritarianism disguised as progressive policy. While academia was viewed as something trying to control free speech, here was someone from within academia cutting through the noise. The timing was perfect. Across the Western world, debates over political correctness and free speech were raging. On one side, critics of campus activism saw a new wave of ideological control. On the other, activists believed they were fighting entrenched injustice. Peterson walked into the firestorm with something the commentators didn't have: dense psychological theory and a manner that felt like a blend of professor and a prophet. His lectures he uploaded were soon being devoured by millions online. His books 12 Rules for Life became an international bestseller because it mixed cultural commentary with self-help in a way that felt unusually personal. He inspired millions, urging people to shoulder the heaviest burden they could bear and strive toward meaning in a chaotic world. Peterson became something rare, an academic turned global celebrity. Compared to most celebrities, this was a man who became famous a lot later in his life. He had the experience to approach fame in a more strategic way. To some, he was a voice of reason resisting ideological extremes. To others, he was a dangerous reactionary cloaking politics in psychology. Either way, he had captured the cultural moment, riding the fault line of a generation's anxieties about freedom and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Peterson had drawn a sharp dividing line in public opinion. His critics accused him of overstating the dangers of misrepresenting the intent of laws like Bill C-16, and of fueling reactionary movements under the guise of intellectual debate. To these critics, his warnings about authoritarian creep sounded alarmist. His stance on compelled speech was a solution in search of a problem. It was in this charged climate that Peterson sat down for his iconic January 2018 interview with Channel 4 news host Kathy Newman. The conversation was immediately hostile. Throughout the interview, Newman repeatedly paraphrased Peterson's arguments in ways his supporters felt distorted his meaning. She was constantly using the phrase, "So what you're saying is..." He would calmly push back, clarifying his points with precision. This guy had some extreme patience. He stayed calm and handled everything she threw at him with absolute grace.
But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me, and that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
Except you haven't sat there and...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah. It took a while.
It did, yeah.
Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire. It felt like a rare moment where a public intellectual was tested under intense scrutiny and emerged unshaken and somehow even sharper. It was truly a turning point. It was proof that he could hold his ground against a combative interviewer and that the media could be more interested in framing a narrative than engaging in genuine dialogue. His credibility with that audience skyrocketed. Kathy Newman helped Jordan Peterson. She had unintentionally assisted in writing a mythic origin story for Peterson's global prominence. Yes, global. His lectures and interviews were being translated into dozens of languages, with fan communities springing up everywhere. In places where political correctness debates weren't the main cultural fault line, people connected to his deeper themes: personal responsibility, resilience in the face of suffering, and the search for meaning in a disorienting modern world. A lot of what he said wasn't even really that revolutionary. It was just kind of common sense advice. A big thing he recommended for changing your life was the 3 words: clean your room. Fans held to these words like prophecy. They saw this as revolutionary advice, which was weird. Clean your room? Really? Telling people to clean their room makes him an intellectual figure in your life? How? Growing up, I was told to clean my room enough times from my dad. Oh, wait. That's why people liked him. Peterson leaned into his momentum. He embarked on a worldwide lecture tour that would sell out large theaters. Despite becoming famous as a political reaction, he was interested in far deeper topics. He spoke about biblical stories, psychology of archetypes, and the philosophical underpinnings of morality. This was thought-provoking content that many attendees admitted they had never sought out before. For some, his talks were a gateway into literature, philosophy, and psychology. It was a call to get their life in order and take control of their circumstances. It was a map to meaning. Peterson mastered the digital ecosystem. His YouTube channel grew into a sprawling archive of classroom lectures, public talks, and podcast appearances. Each clip easily shared across social media. Appearances on the Joe Rogan Experience introduced him to massive new audiences who might never have encountered an academic in such a casual, conversational format. It was official. He was on the public stage. Many of the conversations Peterson was having told us a lot about the way we think. The May 4th, 2018 discussion between Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty marked a key moment in Peterson's trajectory. Dillahunty was a more thoughtful kind of opponent than journalists or campus activists.
I thought it would be nice if we started with something quick and easy and simple, like God. In particular, I don't believe there is one, and I have no idea what your thoughts are on it.
You mean on the fact that you don't believe there is one?
Dillahunty came from the world of skepticism. He was someone who talked to an audience in plain terms. He ran a public access show. He was just an everyday person who took calls from everyday people.
Your mother was on the brink of death, and then she was fine, right?
Yep.
And that's proof that God exists?
Yes.
Okay, what do you call it when a person is perfectly healthy and then drops dead? Is that proof that God does not exist?
No, that's just proof that whatever happens to that person happens.
Congratulations. You get the Caller of the Day award for being honest and answering your own question.
Why is God not real? Why is he?
Okay.
Do you believe in unicorns?
No.
Why?
Because unicorns are fairy tales and it hasn't been proven that there is one.
You are the best caller!
In contrast, Peterson leaned on his usual toolkit, long, winding answers that pulled from psychology, philosophy, and mythology. To his fans, this style sounded profound, but against Dillahunty's direct challenges, it came across as evasive and slippery. Where Dillahunty would press for a clear answer, Peterson often drifted into abstraction. Viewers who were sympathetic to him began to notice the cracks. The impression of word salad was visible in real time. But there was one part of this discussion in particular that stood out to most people.
Science can't confirm the supernatural. I mean, we are blocked until somebody demonstrates a mechanism by which we can explore and confirm the existence of the supernatural, and then confirm that it actually can impact the natural world. We're stuck, which is why science relies on methodological naturalism.
You seem to be able to do it with psychedelic drugs.
You seem to be able to do what with psychedelic drugs?
Now look, I get where Peterson is coming from. If you have a perspective of the transcendent and you are trying to convey to someone the existence of the spiritual, the most effective thing you could possibly provide them to be open to these ideas would be psychedelic drugs. Words can only carry you so far. Words are bound by the limits of ordinary perception, but psychedelic experiences temporarily dissolve those boundaries. They can give someone a direct sense of awe. They bypass intellectual defenses and offer a glimpse of the spiritual in a way that makes openness to belief experiential rather than theoretical, so they make the idea of the transcendent more recognizable. Unfortunately, Peterson bringing this up did not land as clearly in the debate format, and many watching found it confusing and unconvincing. Maybe someone with a background in neurology could appreciate Peterson's perspectives more. The June 24, 2018 debate between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris was hyped as a clash of titans. This was going to be like a UFC pay-per-view, but with brains instead of fists. These two guys were two of the most prominent intellectual figures of the century. Audiences expected a heated and illuminating exchange about morality and the foundations of meaning. Fans were ready to have their minds blown. Instead, what they got was hours of circling and circling around a single word: truth. Harris defined truth in a scientific sense, something that corresponds with objective reality that can be tested and verified. For him, truth was about accuracy. Peterson leaned into a more pragmatic and metaphorical sense of the word. He argued that something could be considered true if it was evolutionary useful or promoted survival. By his definition, a story that wasn't factually accurate could still be true if it helped humanity flourish. Neither man could concede the ground necessary to move the conversation forward. Harris wanted to nail down factual precision, while Peterson kept expanding the definition into broader philosophical territory. Both were intelligent, both were articulate, but their fixation on semantics left the audience frustrated. I was so disappointed listening to this when it dropped, because the debate that had been promised never really happened. Unlike the Kathy Newman interview, which made Peterson look sharp, this exchange left many people thinking he thrived more in adversarial, culture war contexts than in genuine intellectual debate. Instead of building his reputation as a clear thinker, the Harris debate added fuel to the criticism that Peterson's lectures were often more word salad than rigorous philosophy. Becoming famous is not a natural human experience, and Peterson entered the public eye in an unusual way. 2019 to 2020 marked one of the darkest chapters in Jordan Peterson's life. After years of touring, constant interviews, debates, and an exhausting global spotlight, Peterson fell into a dependence on benzodiazepines. He described it as stemming from a prescription to manage anxiety and the overwhelming pressure. What followed was a period of illness, withdrawal, and even hospitalization, as his family searched for ways to help him recover. His struggle was tragic. Even the man who had told millions to stand up straight and carry responsibility was not immune to breaking under the weight of his own. For those who cared about him, his survival was a relief, and his eventual return was a testament to resilience. For audiences who had once seen him as a steady, fatherly figure who preached discipline and personal responsibility, this whole ordeal introduced a sense of dissonance. The professor who told young men to master their vices was nearly undone by his own. The man who urged others to confront chaos directly had seemingly been consumed by it. In some corners, this led to the initial erosion of credibility. What is admirable is that despite it all, he persevered, and he overcame. On June 29, 2022, Jordan Peterson joined Daily Wire Plus, a new streaming arm of Ben Shapiro's conservative media company. This, in my opinion, was a terrible decision, because this is when he joined a team. Part of Peterson's original appeal came from being hard to pin down. He had been able to cultivate the image of an idiosyncratic scholar, abrasive to some, clarifying to others, but always speaking in a register that felt academic rather than overtly partisan. Joining a right-leaning brand traded that slipperiness for clarity of affiliation. It simplified the interpretation of everything he said. Words that once read as tentative scholarship now read as partisan messaging amplified by a company built to monetize division. The move collapsed the rhetorical alibi that allowed critics and admirers to disagree about him without placing him fully inside one political machine. When you sit inside an echo chamber built for attention and subscriptions, incentives change. The Daily Wire rewards content that drives engagement, and engagement is easiest to buy with stronger, clearer edges. Over time, Peterson's public tone began to feel less like the articulate professor who referenced Carl Jung, and more like an angry boomer provocateur. In late 2022, a committee of the College of Psychologists of Ontario concluded that some public statements he made were degrading, demeaning, and unprofessional, and ordered remedial training. The regulatory backlash showed that the behavior he'd increasingly exhibited in public spaces had real professional consequences. The branding effect opened a new vector of critique. It made it easier to accuse him of hypocrisy. Peterson had spent years warning about tribalism and the dangers of moral absolutism dressed as virtue. By migrating into a partisan media stable and adopting some of its combative tactics, he became vulnerable to the exact charge he once leveled at others. Platform incentives encourage escalation, and escalation corrodes the careful distinctions that had been his intellectual currency. A public intellectual's credibility lies in where their speech lives and how it is packaged. When your work becomes part of a content ecosystem that repeats and amplifies particular frames like theatrical culture war outbursts, audiences begin to read new statements through that filter. What used to look like clinical observation can start to look like talking points. Critics respond by interrogating earlier claims with renewed skepticism, and some former allies distance themselves because the signal coming from the thinker has been mixed with a partisan amplifier. Part of Peterson's original appeal was a promise of intellectual independence, and he traded that independence for the security of an institutional home. I'm not saying this was a bad move for his career, I'm saying this was a bad move for his credibility. Once people see you as a player for one team, your credibility can contract. That contraction was the moment a once transcendent figure looked indistinguishable from the partisan mechanics he used to diagnose. This was reflected in how he conducted himself on social media. Peterson became obsessed with Twitter. I'm not exaggerating. He became chronically addicted to Twitter. His tweets became noticeably more erratic and provocative, moving away from the reflective academic tone that had defined his earlier online presence. He began making statements that were more confrontational and often cryptic, leaning into outrage and sensationalism in ways that seemed designed to generate attention rather than thoughtful dialogue. He even started beefing with accounts that had no profile pictures and like 3 followers. It was wild.
These are tiny Elon Musk heads, and this is a Twitter suit. In the lining here, there's a bunch of comments from Twitter about another suit this company made for me.
On March 14th, 2023, he posted one of the worst things anyone has ever seen on social media. He shared a tweet linking to an image depicting men being milked. He suggests that such a scene represented a Chinese sperm factory, when in reality it was just... I don't even want to know what it was. His Twitter made him pretty hard to defend. Even his most devout fans would say, yeah, he's based, but for the love of God, do not look at his Twitter. But critics are everywhere, and critics can be entertaining. The Jubilee Surrounded format is a debate-style setup where one participant sits in the center of a room, while a group of people encircles them, asking questions and challenging their beliefs. After each exchange, the surrounding participants vote on whether they're persuaded, gradually switching out debaters. The format is fast-paced, making it more a stage for performance than a platform for nuanced discussion. On May 25th, 2025, Jordan Peterson went on Jubilee Surrounded. This was like watching a method repeatedly collide with the wrong machine. Surrounded is terrible at allowing someone to unpack a multi-layered intellectual position, and what went wrong was predictable. Peterson's rhetorical instincts are to contextualize, to drift through history, myth, and caveats, and to treat belief as an interpretive practice. That approach is mesmerizing in a long lecture, but on Jubilee, it is the opposite of mesmerizing. Viewers come to a group debate expecting yes or no. Do you believe this? When you answer with layered qualifiers, the room interprets it as dodging the question. The result is a viral impression of a man ducking basic binary queries. One clip specifically went viral from this.
The people who were arguing with me were told a different story than I was told.
Oh.
I was told that it was Jordan Peterson against 20 atheists. They were told that it was a Christian against 20 atheists. And then he said, well, what do you mean? This is a Christian against 20 atheists. You don't even know where you are. And I thought, what the hell? I don't know. I don't understand that. That That wasn't my understanding.
Jubilee had framed the episode in a way that invited a theological face-off, one Christian versus 25 atheists. Jubilee changed the video title 4 hours after posting it to Jordan Peterson versus 25 atheists. Peterson refuses easy labels. He treats Christian as a set of interpretive commitments. That refusal to self-identify in that way caused people to feel he was avoiding the proposition at hand, and social media momentum turned that feeling into a scandalous take. You can see both predictable consequences and divergent reactions afterward. The episode reinforced a long-running pattern. In any context that demands crisp, falsifiable claims, Peterson's wandering, exploratory mode is liable to look like word vomiting. That perception eats away at credibility faster than the content of any one argument. Credibility is as much about perceived clarity and accountability as it is about argument and strength.
The question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Do you believe in God? What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God.
These are valid questions, and there is nothing wrong with having unique, nuanced beliefs that would require complex explanations. I have unique, nuanced beliefs that would require complex explanations, but this is exactly why I would not place myself in debate-style setups. My perspectives would just come off as confusing. Entering a debate might appear more as seeking attention instead of actually conveying a message, which would tarnish the credibility of that message. People are incredibly polarized, and it's difficult for many to entertain an idea without accepting it, even outside debates. When you intend to observe, when you merely present ideas with a centrist tone, people will still label you as a radical. It is a lose-lose. This Jubilee moment matters less for what he said than for how it made people feel about how he speaks. A public intellectual can survive controversial positions if audiences believe the speaker is accountable and understands the rules of the conversational game they're in. Peterson's strength is not made for multi-person debates or 90-second verdicts. The Jubilee clip didn't so much reveal new intellectual failure as it highlighted a persistent mismatch between form and content. When that mismatch goes viral, credibility follows the narrative the clip creates. And what is notable is how even Christians were upset about it. By aligning more closely with conservative cultural spaces, Peterson was entering a political and social arena that required a kind of rhetorical toolkit he did not possess. The Daily Wire pundits ultimately root their arguments in their faith, framing society and culture through the lens of religious perspective. Peterson, however, is not explicit like this. Conservatives expected a figure who could defend a worldview grounded in faith, yet Peterson approached the conversation more as an academic exploring archetypes and moral philosophy. Some comments even argued that a hypothetical Jordan Peterson versus 25 Christians scenario would have been more revealing. It would have exposed precisely how his intellectual approach differs from the faith-based frameworks that dominate much of the conservative commentary. In trying to appeal to his audience, he was placed in a space that amplified his weakness in trying to appeal to his audience. He came off like a grifter. Now we've come full circle to the topic of atheism, because this all paralleled with what we saw in the Reddit atheist archetype of the 2010s. You could no longer opt out of a title or stereotype without a title or stereotype being assigned to you. People absolutely hate it when you do not associate yourself to a title. Because of this, nobody is euphoric. Polarization continues to run rampant in modern culture. The outrage cycles continue to exist, and all culture is countercultural. In the 2010s, people on the left got outraged that their liberal counterparts were not liberal enough. In the 2020s, people on the right are getting outraged that their conservative counterparts are not conservative enough. We just traded the cancel culture left for the cancel culture right. Conservative spaces are changing, as younger, more ideological, rigid participants demand more aggressive adherence to their interpretation of conservatism. These shifts are so extreme that decades from now, as the pendulum swings back and forth, it is not even going to be a surprise when we elect a second term for President Fuentes and Vice President Hyde. The very tactics that once defined the progressive outrage machine were now being deployed in right-wing contexts: interrogation, moral policing, and public shaming.
Hey bitch, we control your bodies. Men win again. And yes, we control your bodies. It's your body, my choice.
How does anal sex help us win the culture war?
I'm gonna let the gay man answer.
Wait a minute.
How does...
I'm gonna answer you. You already asked the question, so I'm gonna answer that question.
There will never be a female president, ever! It's over. Glass ceiling? Dude, it's a ceiling made of fucking bricks. You will never break it. Your stupid face keeps hitting the brick ceiling.
Let's not interrupt each other. Because I have this thing, like people know I have this thing. I have to stay calm, okay? So.
Okay.
How do you keep the bloody psychopaths at bay?
Right.
You know, and the conspiracy theorist mongers and the people who aren't trying to discover the truth, but who are using the conspiratorial edge, let's say.
The grifters.
The groypers, for that matter, right?
But you're talking about a following of young people. I thought your whole thing was like sticking up for them, not calling them the tetrad of evil or something like that.
And now they want to gatekeep me out and do this personality attack and say I'm a bitter loser in my basement. He's lonely. He's weird. He lives in a basement. I'm sorry. Did you guys forget that that's your target audience that you're trying to pander to? Did you forget that for 2 seconds? And I'm the inauthentic person? I am that person.
You think Hitler was very fucking cool?
Yes, I do.
One of them.
And I'm tired of pretending he's not.
These are people who are clearly playing power games for their own benefit, and they're spinning up these conspiratorial narratives and riding on them.
There's a whole generation of them. And if we simply write them off as racist, sexist, misogynist pigs, we'll lose them. And we'll lose them to people like Nick Fuentes.
Because you're a little bit more than a far-right Republican. Hey, what can I say? I think you can say I'm a fascist. Yeah, I am.
If you're saying that Nick Fuentes is leading these young men down the wrong path, well then okay, maybe they could use some Jordan Peterson in their life then, right?
Right.
Like what, maybe you should take that, maybe it's really important. I thought you're supposed to speak up for the voiceless and get all emotional and all that. Like where did all that shit go?
Isn't his whole thing like about totalitarianism and like dehumanizing people? And
this is a huge problem already on the right-wing side. I don't even know what the hell that is anymore, because I don't know what the left is and I don't know what the right is.
But he called me a rat. He said, Nick Fuentes is a rat. And then he came back and amended it and said, no, wait, he's not a rat because rats are odious by their nature. He said, Nick chooses to be a rat.
It would be better to understand what of their package of opinions has validity and what does not. Figure out what we can fix and try to rescue a generation that seems to me to be sliding into nihilism and hatred of everybody.
I am an immigrant. I'm speaking from personal experience.
Get the hell out.
I don't even like... I should get the hell out.
Yes.
Why? I don't want you here.
What is wrong with being weird? What is wrong with living in your basement? That's a lot of people because of the problems you claim to care about. Who's the CIA cutout? Who's the poser? Who is America? But Peterson, like you said, he really was very influential for young men. And I know that because I was one of them at one point, and I had close friends that loved his Bible lecture series, his podcast, Maps of Meaning, which was his original book.
Pulled a lot of young kids away from atheism.
For Peterson, this shift is part of the structural problem his career faced. He became aligned with conservative audiences, but he never fully equipped himself with the ideological orthodoxy these spaces demanded. His previous credibility was always at risk in a climate that punishes hesitation. The outrage he once confronted on the left is now a constant feature on the right. He will always be under fire, scrutinized for whether he conforms to the ever-shifting expectations of a polarized audience. The story of Jordan Peterson is as much about possibility as it is about decline. For a brief moment, he stood as a rare kind of public intellectual. He was someone who could take ancient wisdom and translate it into practical guidance for people who felt adrift in modern life. He encouraged millions to confront suffering with courage, to find meaning in responsibility, and to reimagine their own lives as part of something larger. For many, he was the first voice to say what they desperately needed to hear, that their struggles mattered, and they had the strength to endure them. Well, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell grew into figures of the psyche and the mythic imagination. Peterson's trajectory bent toward the heat of culture wars. Jung and Campbell chose depth over spectacle. They built legacies not by chasing controversy, but by curating wisdom that could outlast them. Peterson, by contrast, leaned into the polarization of the age, and in doing so, compromised what could have been a similar legacy. That does not erase the impact he had, nor the inspiration many drew from him. However, it does illustrate the fragility of credibility in an era where every message is filtered through the media. But of course, Peterson is a product of his time. He spent his whole life immersed in learning psychology and human nature. He thought about his actions. In his arguments, he always thought many steps ahead. He operates on a different psychological level in the way he makes connections to things. So maybe there's a deeper strategy to what he's doing that he fully understands and we don't understand. Peterson's rise shows the hunger people have for wisdom and depth, and his fall shows how easily that hunger can be co-opted by polarization. If there is hope, it lies in remembering what first drew people to him. In the face of chaos, meaning is possible. That lesson can outlive the man, provided we carry it forward with the discernment that he, at his most human, sometimes lacked.
How do you overcome the suffering of life? Is be a better person. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility. You want to have a meaningful life? Everything you do matters. That's the definition of a meaningful life. But everything you do matters. So you're going to have to carry that with you.